What was it about that process that helped crystallize that thought? That's what's missing for me, is the actual real reflection. You're telling me what, and I want to know why. Application Renovation, Season 2, Episode 12. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you are welcome. I'm excited to jump into your application. I think this is the first application renovation where we had a friend from up north, up in Canada on the show, but still with an application to American schools or U.S. schools. So we'll dive into that. Before I dive into your application and what I can see, tell me about the feedback potentially that you have received with your application, the success of your application, interviews, anything like that.
So my application hasn't been successful for this round. It's my first time applying to the States. I was applying to Canada for the last 4 years, but I decided to try down south to see if it would be a bit better in terms of outcomes. For, how can I put this? So based on feedback that I've received, I think one aspect where I am lacking is clinical experience being very obvious in the application.
Yeah.
And another piece would likely be either my science GPA or possibly my other extracurriculars not being strong enough. Or maybe my personal statement was another thing. I don't know if my seed is clear or resonating.
Oh, I like your language. You've read my book. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a little bit everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, not good. But just from the outset, let me, for anyone watching this, listening to this, for all of our other friends up north, for our U.S. counterparts who don't understand why Canadians have it so hard, right? Lots of Canadians want to go to medical school. There aren't a lot of medical schools in Canada. It's really, 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 really competitive. And the clinical side of things, right? Something that we look at a lot here in the US when it comes to really just understanding why you want to be a physician, that is focused on a lot less in Canada. I don't necessarily like it. They focus a lot more on stats, and we'll just teach you how to be a doctor, not necessarily if you want to be a doctor, just if you're smart enough to be a doctor, come and be a doctor. That's how Canada focuses a little bit more on it. In the US, it's a lot more clinical experience. But in Canada, it's so much harder to get that clinical experience as a student, especially shadowing experience, where it's, I think, illegal in some of the provinces. So something to think about for a Canadian watching this who is potentially early on in the process, who wants to apply to U.S. medical schools. It's something to think about for your application, to know that U.S. medical schools focus on a lot of different things than Canadian schools. So we'll put that context out there, and then we will jump in and look at your application. Sound good?
So.
All right, so looking at the application, I just marked Canadian applicant on there just to show it a little bit different. I don't have the submission date. Do you know when you submitted your application?
I do have it. Just give me 1 second and I'll pull up the exact date for you.
Okay.
I believe it was July 7th or July 2nd. Sorry.
Okay, so early on, probably was processed a month or so after that, month and a half after that. Okay. And then, so no red flags on the application, which is great. The getting down to grades, obviously students can see that Canadian grades are different. They're a number-based system. Most U.S. schools are letter-based system. It all works out the same. I didn't mark any of these, so a few of them, right, a 63, I guess, is probably not very good. I'm assuming higher is better. That's the gist of it, right? 67. So a few bad grades in here, but a lot of what we would consider B's and A's in the 80s and 90s. And then we get to graduate courses with letter grades, so that's good. Talk to me about your GPA, because the PDF that I originally got didn't have the GPA. I know you sent me in my email, but I didn't have time to get it in here. What is your post-bac, or what does your cumulative undergraduate science GPA look like?
My science GPA is 3.69.
So 3.69 science GPA. So that's not an issue. It doesn't look like you did any post-bac classes, just the graduate level classes.
Just the graduate level,
What's your graduate science GPA?
So my graduate degree was actually global health.
Okay.
There weren't any science courses. It was more policy and business based.
Okay, so that's an all other. What was your graduate GPA?
3.84.
Okay, so solid GPA there. And then what was your cumulative GPA, undergraduate GPA?
3.79.
Okay, so for me, GPA is not an issue.
Okay.
Okay, MCAT score 513, great, not an issue. Right, and so a lot of students will look at this. American, U.S. students. I don't like saying American because you're American too. U.S. students will look at this and they'll go, "Wait, you retook a 511? Why the heck would you do that?" Because Canada is ridiculous, right? You just need such high scores, and unfortunately, there's this. It's a myth, but it's true that Canada only focuses on cars. It's true for some of the schools. But not all of the schools in Canada. And with your 123 in cars, that was definitely, if you were looking at Canadian schools, that 123 is most likely going to hold you back from some of them. But for me, GPA for U.S. schools. I'm going to focus mostly on U.S. schools. Canadian schools, GPA and MCAT are just ridiculously high stats. And that is a very big cutoff for those schools. There's just not enough medical schools, too many people applying. So that's just how they have to do it. For U.S. schools, they're very good stats. Now, depending on the schools that you applied to, are you an international applicant? Are you not an international applicant? Did you do any research into that with your school list?
So I tried to do this. Again, I was going in kind of blind. I wasn't really sure what resources to use. I generally went with the ones where I was considered an international applicant, I believe, from what I saw. And then again, like finance-wise, I couldn't apply to as many as I wanted this cycle. Actually, before we jump, for the MCAT, so the last time I wrote it was 2017. Mm-hmm. And it's not valid for 2021 entry for most schools, I believe. So I don't know how schools will see if I rewrite it for a fourth time in the state. Let
me do some quick interpreting. So rewrite equals retake for our U.S. friends. You silly Canadians. So you sat for the MCAT the last time in 2017. You wrote it in 2017. The kind of 3-year cutoff is probably not going to be good for a lot of schools. Now, every school has some different, like if you took it in June versus March or April, September, whatever. Do your research. For everyone watching this, do your research in the schools that you want to apply to. If you have an older MCAT, see if it's valid for the schools that you want to apply to. So retaking the MCAT, obviously that's not fun, but you've shown success with it. Just repeat that success and maybe do even better, right? So solid MCAT, solid GPA. Now, as an international applicant, there's some thought that you just have to have amazing, out of this world stats, and that's not necessarily true. There are plenty of schools out there accepting international students who have decent stats, but not amazing stats, and you have very good stats. So, stat-wise, not a potential huge issue in my mind. Getting back to your application experiences, the first thing I get to is publications, lots of hours there. So obviously involved in research, part of potentially your global health degree, I'm assuming that this is for. I highlighted here the language that you used. You used very resume type language, which I don't like, right? Consulted academic and grade literature, discovered a disproportionate burden, right? Talk normally in your application, write in normal sentences. The kind of bulleted but in essay format writing like this is very resume-ish, and it's not very impactful or memorable. Okay. So that's just kind of a style thing. So lots of good hours there. Community service, a ton of hours that you're doing. Obviously, as we look through your application, we can see where your focus is, kind of with your culture, your religion, with that community, which is great. So a lot of focus on there. I love the impact that you have here, where it said the symposium that had over 265 attendees, right? Showing numbers shows impact, and that's good. That's the kind of stuff I like to see. So for kind of what this is, right? You talk about being a project manager for that kind of experience. Numbers and impact, the more that you have, the better it'll be. Global health practicum, right? So a little bit more. The question that some students would have is, should I include school-related things in my, what is typically referred to as my extracurricular list? Now, there's no right or wrong. You can do it. I think it's okay putting it in here, but a lot of students will ask that question. So school-related, 350 hours, going to Athens and Greece. You have some good information here. You have a little bit of a story in here that you're trying to tell, so that's all good. The global health case competition, so a little bit more from school, but an award from Emory, which is great. Being a TA, tutor, etc. experience, talking about that. Here I would have included a story, right? Tell me a story of a student who you interacted with, a student who you impacted, what that looked like. How you wrote it is just a very generic way of writing it that a lot of students focus on, of kind of just literally what you did. Okay. And like this last sentence here, I ensure my students have grasped concepts and have a solid foundation before asking them to apply their learning, right? Well, good. That means you're a decent tutor, right? Because that's what you should do. So focus on the story. The note taker, volunteer note taker. So that's an experience that some students do, take notes during class to help potentially students with disabilities who can't take notes. Right? One of the things you put in here, this role strengthened my note-taking skills. Like, okay, not super impactful. I don't really care. Great, you're a great note taker. So that, to me, that's just, remember, impact on you, impact on whatever organization or person or whatever that you're trying to talk about. So just a kind of a funny thing that stood out. So the lay minister here. So again, going back more to your community, your culture. Good, interesting thing here. Tell me a story, right? I always want to see story as much as possible. If you don't have a story, show me impact through numbers and other stuff. Okay. So I've gotten this far, and I still don't see any clinical experience, right? Which is what we talked about at the beginning, the kind of a lack of clinical experience, lack of shadowing. So a reviewer looking at this will understand. They understand Canadians don't have access like American students do, or US students do, to clinical experience, to shadowing. And so it's not necessarily a red flag to this point. The question will always come down to, well, why do you want to be a doctor, right? If you don't have access to get those experiences, how can you tell me you want to be a physician? Which is why I don't really like the Canadian way of doing it, because I want to know that you want to be a doctor, not just that you're like, oh, being a doctor is cool and I have the CAR score to prove it, right? So moving on, right? Just a random aside, right? It kind of goes back to the step 1 score, going pass fail. I don't want to know that you want to be a radiologist just because you have the step 1 score to solidify it. I want to know that you want to be a radiologist, period, and then you have the step 1 score to get into radiology. Right. A lot of students will go, oh, look at my step 1 score. Let me pick my residency based on that. I'm like, no, it's like, pick a residency based on what you want to do. And right, so I like pass fail for that reason. But anyway, random side. I have a whole podcast on the Premed years for that if you want to listen to that. premedyears.com/379. Mentor, right? Non-medical, clinical, a role model for freshman students. Again, tell me a story of one of those students potentially where you acted as a role model. Founder, CEO of a business, so doing henna, which is great. Again, impacts, right? How many people did you do henna for? Like, how big did the business grow? How much money did you make, right? Show me impact in that way. That shows me a lot about you as a person through those numbers of impact. Leadership, great. Pre-medical society. You have some numbers in here, right? Delegated tasks to 20 executive members. This is, in my mind, and I didn't highlight it, which I should have, these are great numbers, right? Delegated to 20 people, had over 80 attendees, raised $2,000, right? All that great stuff. That shows impact. That's what I like. And then we finally get to some physician shadowing at the end. So you were able to shadow in Toronto. You have Mount Sinai on here. I don't know if that's New York or anywhere else. There's lots of Mount Sinai hospitals everywhere. Yeah. So you do have some shadowing from 14 to 19 with 56 total hours. So not a ton of hours, but again, understandable Canadian applicant, hard to find shadowing. A lot of who you know to be able to work around the system. In my mind, just without looking at anything else, right now, again, the weakness is clinical experience, and so we'll keep going. We have research lab. I wanted to highlight the research assistant experience that you have here from St. Michael's as a way not to do descriptions and most meaningfuls. So the way that you did it here, which was just clear that you did it, was that you basically wrote one big essay and you split it up between the two boxes, right? I began as a research volunteer that assisted with data collection, blah, 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 blah. The second project was a qualitative study, right? It's just a continuation of the previous essay. I do not recommend doing that. The first box is the description, however you want to tell that story. The second box is most meaningful essay. Like, why was this meaningful for you as a person, and telling that through another story, if possible. You have the honors, awards, and recognitions. Again, lots of good numbers showing impact, which is great. The community service volunteer, right? This hospital volunteer, you did it in 2012. You did it from 2019 to 2020, projected out, right, during the application cycle. It looks like you were like, oh crap, I need to get some clinical experience. Let me go do that. Which again, Canadian applicant, not really knowing that you want to apply to U.S. medical schools, and you're like, oh, I'm going to apply to U.S. now. Yes, you're checking a box kind of last minute. I know U.S. medical schools like this stuff. It looks like that. It is what it is. I'm just glad that you're doing it, right? But this is just potentially what it looks like. Now, the question is how you wrote about the experience is art-based activities with the geriatric patients. Some adcoms will look at that and go, that's art class. That's not clinical experience. In my mind, it's clinical experience. Some adcoms may not like it. Oh, well. You're interacting with the patients. You're just doing a specific activity with them. Yeah. And then some more awards there at the end. So, right, we get to the end of this, and it's like, okay, definitely clinical experience for U.S. medical schools where it's important not to the medical schools. And this is something I always have to repeat myself to give context for students who maybe this is the first time they're listening to me, is you don't need clinical experience to check a box for the medical schools. You need clinical experience so that the medical schools know that you've proven to yourself that you like being around sick people, that you like being in some sort of clinical environment, that you like taking care of patients who are pooping and peeing and vomiting and have stuff oozing out of everywhere, right? That you like being around that, or you tolerate it enough to get through this process, that you have the shadowing, that you understand what a doctor's life is. A lot of students think that doctors are just seeing patients all day long and by the bedside and caring for people and crying with the families, and doctors are on the phones and behind the computer and not seeing patients a lot of the time. And so having those experiences to prove to yourself that this is what you want is really, really, really important. And again, as a Canadian applicant who can't get a lot of those experiences, or you can, it's just a lot harder, makes that hurdle much bigger. Okay? And then typically, the lack of experiences will resonate in the personal statement, which is kind of where you need to put all of this together. Mm-hmm. So you get to your personal statement here. We get to your personal statement, and the story right off the bat, I was a little confused with the timeline of some good showing, right? His death came as a surprise. I'm like, ooh, whose death? Like, what's going on, right? So good writing, nice suspenseful opening here. Your brother and I'm like, oh, your brother died. I'm like, oh, no, you tricked me. You talk about your grandfather here passing, and you have on here, unfortunately, by the time I was exposed to pathophysiology, my grandfather had long passed. And so the question is your grandfather your seed? If he's your seed, why are you talking about pathophysiology right now? Or were you already interested in medicine and you're just kind of cramming your grandfather in as a seed? So I'm a little confused at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then you talk about not long after your grandfather's death, you're talking about your grandmother and how being a premed, you were able to help. And I'm like, well, again, if your grandfather was your seed, how were you able to jump into being a premed so soon? What does this timeline look like? So I was a little confused with kind of the timeline of events and what impacted you the most to go down this journey, or were you already on this journey and you're trying to fit together the stories to make it work? So a little confusing right off the bat. Okay. You have the story of your grandmother overhearing the hematologist. So it's very interesting, decent writing. Maybe could be a little bit better showing, but good. The conclusion of this, right, is the doctor saved your grandmother's life. In the process, crystallized your goal to help others heal. Why? What was it about that process that helped crystallize that thought? That's what's missing for me, is the actual real reflection. You're telling me what, and I want to know why.
Why? Okay.
You have another good experience here with Dr. T. Don't call him Mr. T unless he's wearing lots of gold necklaces. Dr. T attempted to get a good image. You saw the fetus moving. You said to the patient, it is okay. To me, that was a red flag when you potentially said that in the way that you said it. It was almost like you were saying, hey, I was able to read the ultrasound and I'm giving the patient comfort that the baby's okay. Right? I'm like, wait, like, how do you know? Right? There's a reason the people who run the MRI machines, the reason the sonographers aren't giving results to the patients is because they don't have the full context. Can they? A lot of times give like, oh crap, that's a big tumor that I just saw in the MRI. Sure, they can. But to be able to give that full context and actual give reassurance. So that was just a little bit of a weird red flag to me of like, why are you communicating results of this sonogram to the patient? Right. The patient facing you saying, you do not know how much holding your hand meant to me. Thank you. I like to have students just avoid the thanks and the gratitude and everything else in a personal statement and in the activity descriptions and wherever. I understand that it feels really good, right? I've been there. It feels really good to get that hug, to get a thank you note from patients saying, "Oh my God, thank you so much. It meant so much to me." But focusing on that in a personal statement as a potential reason why you want to go into medicine, for me, is the wrong thing to focus on. Because there are going to be lots of patients who aren't thankful, who don't show gratitude. And how are you going to react to them? Right? Mm-hmm. So if you're focusing on the gratitude part of this, I'm wondering if you're focusing on the wrong part, if you're in this for the wrong reasons. Okay.
Yeah.
The last part of this page of the PDF, this next paragraph about the quality of life team in your religious community, to me, that's an extracurricular activity, not a reason potentially why it's impacting your life to want to go into medicine, right? The story there just isn't a why medicine story. It's a great extracurricular. I would include it somewhere if you haven't already. But for me, the focus of that story is what I highlighted in red, which is the importance of giving back to community. And being a physician is so much more than just giving back to community. There are lots of ways to give back to community. We don't have to go get lots of debt to do that. And then the conclusion here, it starts off with lots of generic statements. So medicine is more than knowing science. It's knowing people, showing compassion, embracing vulnerability, and recognizing everyone requires a solution suited to their individual ability and lifestyle, right? Yes. True statements, 100% true. I agree with them. Doesn't tell me anything about you, right? So I need to know more about you. You have here, becoming a physician will allow you to support others. Again, kind of like giving back to the community, supporting others so much. Being a physician so much more than just supporting others. And so to me, the personal statement is likely a reflection of the lack of clinical experience, which unfortunately is part of your story, part of being a Canadian applicant. And so moving forward, the better you can do, the harder that you can build network and connections and friendships with people who can get you into those clinical experiences, or you just come down to the States and get some clinical experience, the better your story will be, because you'll understand a lot more, at least for a U.S. application, you'll understand a lot more why you're doing this, to be able to help you through this process. And then just to quickly look at your school list here, BU, Columbia, Duke, Dartmouth, GW, MCW, and Tulane. Again, without looking at the MSAR, which I would suggest all students look at for especially Canadian applicants. And I would reach out to a lot of the medical schools and say, hey, like, I'm a Canadian applicant. I really love your school because of XYZ. Do you consider Canadian applicants out-of-state residents? Do you consider them international applicants? The schools that consider you out-of-state applicants, you'll probably have a better chance versus international, where it's kind of a different bucket of students. Obviously, from a financial standpoint, there's still the finances and all of that you need to overcome. But that's the fun part of being a Canadian applicant to U.S. medical schools. So, with all that said, what questions do you have?
So, in terms of the personal statement, based on the things you pointed out, I now see where my wording was not the best in terms of expressing what I wanted to say. So, if to improve that aspect, like you said, the lack of clinical experience is likely leading to this not really expressing what I want and really hitting my seed. Do you have any other suggestions? Like, let's say I can't get shadowing. Like, what would be something that as a Canadian I could do? Like, coming down is one thing to the States, but within Canada, is there something else you've seen that others have done?
So it's most of the time what I see from successful Canadian applicants is if you want to come to a U.S. medical school, is just building those networks as much as possible, volunteering in the hospital as much as possible, and using the volunteer positions or even work positions where you're in a hospital to build the connections with the physicians who will then allow you to shadow because you're already in the system. That's one of the biggest hurdles that I've heard with Canadians is getting into the system to begin with, even though shadowing is a very frowned upon thing for the most part. Building that relationship with a physician so that they understand, oh, you're not going to be the person who's going to disrupt me while I'm working, yeah, you can come shadow me and we'll make sure the patients are okay with it, etc. The other option is going to the Caribbean, going to an international medical school, and really just focusing on that part of the process, knowing that it's going to be hard to get into a U.S. medical school. A Caribbean school for you, I'm not concerned about. You've proven yourself academically. You'll continue to work hard in the Caribbean, and really just prove to yourself and really work hard to get back into the States or up in Canada, coming back for residency.
Okay. And in terms of my extracurriculars, is there anything in particular you feel like, I focus a lot within my community. Do you think that's a negative?
Nope.
Or?
Nope. That just shows me who you are. Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Right. Because I've heard mixed opinions, so I just wanted to.
Nope. I'm of the opinion of you should do what you want to do.
Okay.
You need to prove to yourself that you want to be a doctor, so clinical experience, shadowing, etc. But if you are highly involved in your community and you love that aspect and that just gives you life and the support, do it. Love it.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I think that's about it. It's clear where my weaknesses are, so now it makes sense as to why my application wasn't as successful as I thought it would be. Yeah. Do you have any other recommendations you feel?
No, I don't think so. Just build those networks as much as possible. Reach out to schools and find the ones that are going to be Canadian friendly, and just do as much as possible. If you have significant ties to any place in the States, right? I know several students who have applied to the States, gotten in, even interviewed at public schools. Because they like, one student came down to Kentucky every summer to visit her uncle. The University of Kentucky gave her an interview, right? They're like, oh yeah, that's cool. You know Kentucky, you like Kentucky, you're here a lot. Come down, we'll interview you. Okay. So those options are there as well.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I have a cousin who resides in Atlanta, so maybe I'll utilize my visits with her.
All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful, give you some ideas on how to improve your application, and hopefully set you up for success moving forward. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and being vulnerable and helping hopefully a lot of students along the way.
Yeah. Thank you for taking time to review with me. I appreciate it. It did help a lot.
Great.